The delivery driver was still walking up our front path when Marlene leaned out her door and called across the yard to our neighbor Patty, loud enough that I could hear every single word through my open kitchen window. "My son put his wife in her place fast," she announced, like she was reporting the weather. "Now she'll not only cover my rent, but pay for all my food, too." I told him, "That's how you manage a wife." I stood at my kitchen sink, both hands gripping the edge of the counter, water still running cold over my wrists. 27 years. 27 years of marriage, and it had come to this. My mother-in-law bragging to the neighbors about my humiliation, while a DoorDash driver climbed our porch steps. Except the person who showed up at that door wasn't the delivery driver. It was my sister Renee. And everything I thought I understood about the past 6 months collapsed in a single second when I saw the expression on her face. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this really started, to a sweltering Tuesday in late July, to the life I had built and believed in completely, and to the first hairline crack that I was too stubborn, or maybe too tired, to take seriously. I'm Carolyn. I'm 49 years old, and I've been a CPA for 22 years. I work at a mid-size accounting firm in a suburb about 30 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of suburb where the lawns are manicured and the HOA sends passive-aggressive letters about the angle of your trash cans. My husband is Dale Whitmore. We met when I was 22 and he was 24, at a work happy hour that I almost didn't attend because I had a quarterly close the next morning. He spilled a craft beer on my blazer and spent the rest of the night apologizing. I let him take me to dinner the following Saturday to make up for the dry cleaning bill, and that was that. We got married the following spring, and for most of those 27 years, I genuinely believed I had made the best decision of my life. We have a good house, 3 bedrooms, attached garage, a backyard with a flagstone patio that Dale and his brother laid themselves over one brutal August weekend back in 2009. We have a solid 401k, mine mostly, because I've been meticulous about it. No children, which was a choice we made together in our early 30s and never regretted. No pets either. Our life was clean and organized in a way that felt earned. I paid attention to the details. That's what accountants do. Dale worked in logistics management for a regional distribution company. Not glamorous, but steady. He made around $78,000 a year. I cleared just over $94,000. We split household costs proportionally, kept joint accounts for shared expenses, kept individual accounts for personal spending. It worked. It had always worked. What also worked, for a very long time, was keeping Dale's mother at a comfortable distance. Marlene Whitmore is 68 years old, lives 4 streets over from us, a fact that felt manageable when we first bought the house 12 years ago, and has felt progressively less manageable ever since. She's the kind of woman who describes herself as just honest, while saying things that would make a therapist wince. She calls her intrusions checking in. She calls her criticism only trying to help. She has a gift for making you feel surveilled without ever doing anything you could point to directly and say, that right there, that's the problem. For most of our marriage, I handled Marlene the way I handle a difficult audit, carefully, systematically, with clear documentation of every boundary crossed. Dale understood. He'd grown up with her. He knew. Or I thought he knew. The summer this all unraveled started like every other summer, hot, humid. The kind of July in central Ohio where the air sits on you like a wet blanket and the cicadas are so loud you can hear them inside the house with the windows shut. I was deep in the middle of a complicated tax situation for one of our larger clients, a family-owned manufacturing business with subsidiaries in 3 states and bookkeeping practices that could generously be described as creative. I was working long hours, coming home drained, eating dinner late. Dale had been quieter than usual. I noticed it, but filed it away as stress. He'd had a difficult quarter at work, too. We weren't fighting, we were just parallel. Ships in the same harbor, pointed different directions. The first thing that should have alarmed me happened on a Wednesday evening, July 17th. I remember the date because it was exactly 3 days before my firm's summer deadline, and I had mentally color-coded the entire week in my head. I came home at 7:15 to find Dale and Marlene sitting at my kitchen table with takeout containers spread between them and a legal-size envelope sitting open near Dale's elbow. I said, "Hey," and set my bag down. I said, "What's all this?" Dale looked at his mother before he looked at me. That was the moment right there that I should have clocked as significant. He looked at her first. "Mom's lease is up in September," he said. "Her landlord is raising the rent by $400 a month." I poured myself a glass of water and sat down. "Okay, that's a big jump. What's she thinking about doing?" Marlene folded her hands on the table. She has a particular posture, she assumes, when she's about to deliver something she's already decided, a kind of deliberate stillness, like a judge settling into a bench. "I was thinking," she said, "about moving in here." I kept my face neutral. It's a skill I've developed over 2 decades of sitting across from clients who owe the IRS money and don't want to hear it. "This is a 3-bedroom house," I said, "and we use both spare rooms. One's my home office." "You could move your office things to the basement," Marlene said pleasantly. "There's plenty of room down there." I looked at Dale. He was studying a container of lo mein like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Dale," I said, "it's just an idea," he said. "We're just talking." We were not, as it turned out, just talking. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that my stomach had dropped about 3 inches, and that Marlene was watching me with that particular expression she wears when she's testing how much resistance she'll encounter, measuring the distance between what she wants and what she'll have to work around to get it. I told them I needed to think about it. I told them it was a big decision, and I had a deadline coming up, and this wasn't the right week for it. Marlene smiled and said, of course, take all the time I needed." She patted my hand. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed for a while in the dark. I wasn't panicking. I'm not a person who panics. I was cataloging, running numbers, calculating the square footage of my office, the proximity of the basement to the rest of the house, the cost of converting the space, the strain on our utility bills, the loss of privacy, the gradual, grinding erosion of the life I had spent 27 years building. I told myself it was just an idea. I told myself Dale and I would talk about it properly, calmly, and I would explain my position clearly, and he would hear me. He had always heard me before. That was the last week I believed that. Because here's what I didn't know on that Wednesday night, sitting on the edge of our bed in the dark. My sister Renee had been talking to Dale for nearly a month. Not about anything obvious, not about anything I could have found if I'd gone looking, just conversations, advice. Renee, who has always had strong opinions about how I run my life, who has always believed, with a warmth that somehow never stops feeling like a hand around your throat, that I need to be protected from myself. Renee is 53, 4 years older than me. She has never once in her life let me forget it. She calls her interference, looking out for you. She calls her opinions, just being real. She and Marlene had never particularly liked each other, but they had, it turned out, found common ground in me. I didn't know any of this yet. What I knew was that on Thursday morning I came downstairs to find a brochure for basement conversion companies on the kitchen counter, and that Dale had left for work already, and that Marlene had apparently texted him a list of her furniture dimensions. I picked up the brochure and held it for a moment. Then I set it back down, picked up my travel mug, and drove to work. I had a quarterly filing to finish. I would deal with this when the deadline passed. I was always good at compartmentalizing. I had no idea that by the time my deadline passed, the compartments would already be gone. The deadline passed on July 20th. I submitted the filing at 11:47 p.m., ate half a sleeve of crackers standing over the kitchen sink, and went to bed without washing my face. Dale was already asleep, or pretending to be. I'd stopped being able to tell the difference. The next morning, I sat across from him at the kitchen table with my coffee and said, calmly and directly, that I didn't want Marlene moving in. I explained my reasoning the way I would explain a complex tax position to a client, organized, logical, without emotional language. I said that I valued my home office, that I needed separation between my work life and my home life to function, and that I believed having his mother 4 streets away was already the right arrangement. I said we could help her find a new apartment, help cover the difference in rent if she genuinely couldn't manage it, but that she could not move into our spare bedroom. Dale stirred his coffee for a long time. Then he said, "She's my mother, Carolyn." "I know she is," I said, "and I'm your wife." He nodded slowly. "I hear you," he said. "I'll talk to her." I believed him. That's the part I keep coming back to. 27 years and I still believed him. He didn't talk to her. Or rather, he did talk to her, but not in the way he'd implied. I found out what that conversation actually looked like 3 weeks later, when I overheard him on the phone in the garage. He hadn't pulled the door all the way shut, and I'd come downstairs for water at 11 at night and caught his voice drifting through the gap. "She'll come around," he was saying. "Just give it a little more time. I'm handling it." I stood in the kitchen in the dark and listened to my husband tell his mother to be patient while he managed me. I stood there for probably 2 full minutes. Then I went back upstairs and lay down on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling until the alarm went off at 6. I want to say that was the moment I started fighting back, but it wasn't. I'm ashamed to admit that, but it's true. What I did instead was convince myself I had misheard, or misunderstood, that there was context I wasn't aware of. I was very skilled at finding interpretations that didn't require me to take action. I had spent years doing exactly that with Marlene, and apparently I had applied the same technique to Dale without ever realizing it. August was worse. The brochures for basement conversion companies kept appearing in places they shouldn't have been. On the kitchen counter, tucked into the mail pile, once on my actual desk in my home office, which meant someone had gone in there. I never caught anyone. The brochures just accumulated like sediment. Marlene started coming over more frequently. 3 times a week became 5. She'd arrive mid-morning with a container of something she'd made, soup, a casserole, once an entire pie, and she and Dale would be deep in conversation by the time I came downstairs. When I walked in, the conversation would shift. They'd talk about the weather, or a neighbor, or something benign on the news. The moment I left the room, I could hear the murmur start again. I started working from home more, which I'd always had the option to do but rarely used. I told myself it was about productivity. Really, I was counting. I was building a record in my head that I hadn't yet admitted I was building. The worst moment of that month, the one I never told anyone about, the one I'm only putting into words now, happened on a Sunday afternoon in mid-August. I'd gone to the grocery store and come back to find Marlene in my home office. Not in the doorway, inside. She was standing at my filing cabinet, and the top drawer was open. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice came out very flat. She turned around without any particular hurry. "Looking for a pen," she said. "Dale said I could use the printer." The filing cabinet does not contain pens. It contains client folders, tax records, financial documents with social security numbers, and account information for a dozen different businesses. I stood in the doorway holding 2 bags of groceries and looked at my open filing cabinet and my mother-in-law's completely unbothered expression, and something in my chest went very cold and very still. "Please don't go through that cabinet," I said. "That's confidential professional material." "Oh, I wasn't going through it," she said pleasantly. "I told you I was looking for a pen." I set the groceries down on my desk, closed the drawer, and locked the cabinet with the small key I kept in my cardigan pocket. My hands were steady. I was proud of that. Marlene watched me do it, with the expression of someone mildly entertained by a child's overreaction. I went downstairs and found Dale in the living room watching a preseason game. "Your mother was in my filing cabinet," I said. He looked up. "She probably just needed a pen." "Dale, my client files are in that cabinet. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That's not a miscommunication. That's a professional liability issue." He muted the TV. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not guilty, not defensive, but something closer to tired. Like I was the one causing a problem. "She's not going to steal from you, Carolyn." That is not the point I'm making. Then what's the point you're making? I looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, I said. I genuinely don't know anymore. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed again, in the same spot I'd sat in July, and this time I didn't catalog or analyze. I just sat there with my hands in my lap and felt how completely alone I was in my own house. That was the bottom. That Sunday afternoon in August, sitting on the edge of my bed while a football game murmured through the floor, realizing that the man I'd built everything with had quietly, incrementally, without any single dramatic moment, chosen someone else. Not a woman, his mother. He had chosen his mother's version of our life over the one we had actually built together. I cried. Quietly, because I've always cried quietly. And then I washed my face and went downstairs and made dinner, and we ate it without talking much, and that was that. The next morning, a Monday, I called my friend Deb. Deb Okafor has been my closest friend for 16 years. We met at a professional development seminar in Cincinnati. She's a CFO for a mid-size healthcare company, and we have had lunch together at least once a month for the better part of a decade. She is precise, unsentimental, deeply loyal, and she has never once pretended that Marlene was anything other than what she is. I sat in my car in the firm's parking garage and told her everything. The brochures, the overheard phone call, the filing cabinet, the look on Dale's face when he said she wasn't going to steal from me, as though the entire point had sailed over his head. Deb listened without interrupting. That's one of her best qualities. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Carolyn, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it." "Okay," I said. "Are you considering leaving him?" I looked through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking garage. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. I don't know what I'm considering." "Then here's what I think you should do right now, regardless of what you decide. You need to talk to a lawyer, not because your marriage is over, because you need to understand what your position looks like if it does end. You need to know the landscape." "I'm not ready for that." "I know you're not," she said. "I'm not telling you to file anything. I'm telling you to make one phone call, to understand your situation. You're an accountant, Carolyn. You never go into a complicated situation without reviewing the numbers first. This is the same thing." She was right. I knew she was right the second she said it, which is why I didn't argue. That afternoon, I called a family law attorney named Patricia Suarez, whose name I'd gotten from a colleague who'd gone through a divorce 2 years earlier. I didn't tell Dale. I sat in a conference room at my firm with the door closed, and I made the appointment for the following Thursday. Patricia's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and she had the quiet authority of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not going to be surprised by mine. She let me lay out the entire situation: the marriage, Marlene, the financial structure of our household, the joint and separate accounts, the house, the 401k, and when I was done, she asked me a series of very specific questions about asset documentation and whether my name was on the deed and what our prenuptial situation was, and I answered each one with the same precision I'd bring to any other financial review. At the end, she said, "You're in a much stronger position than you think you are. The house deed, you're both on it, correct?" "Yes," I said. "And the 401k is in your name only?" "Mine is. He has one through his employer, separate." "Good. Keep documenting everything. Not for court necessarily, but for clarity. When people start making significant decisions about shared space and shared finances without the other spouse's full consent, documentation becomes your foundation." She paused. "I want to be clear. I'm not telling you your marriage can't be saved. That's not my department. What I'm telling you is that you should not make any financial decisions right now, and you should not let anyone else make them on your behalf." I drove home from that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, more like ground under my feet again. The next day, I changed the lock on my home office door. I told Dale it was because I'd had a client express concern about data security during a remote audit, which was technically true, though not the reason. I put the only key on my keychain next to my car key. Marlene came over that afternoon and tried the door and found it locked and said nothing, but I watched her face from the hallway, and what I saw there wasn't confusion. It was calculation. I started photographing things, the brochures, text message threads between Dale and Marlene that I could see over his shoulder when he wasn't careful. Dates, times, the specific things said. I was building something, even though I still hadn't fully admitted to myself what I was building it toward. And then, 2 weeks into September, my sister Renee called. She called on a Tuesday evening while I was sitting in my car in the driveway, not quite ready to go inside. I'd been doing that a lot, sitting in the car for 10 or 15 minutes after work, just breathing, before I walked through the door and became whatever version of myself the house required. I almost didn't answer. Renee and I had a complicated history, and she had a way of calling at exactly the wrong moment, with exactly the wrong energy. But something made me pick up. "Hey," I said. "Carolyn." Her voice was different than usual, tighter. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to me all the way through before you react." I sat up straighter. "Okay?" "I've been talking to Dale." The car felt very small all of a sudden. "I know," I said, though I hadn't known, not specifically, not for certain. "He called me in July," she said. "He said he was worried about you, said you were being unreasonable about Marlene, and he didn't know how to get through to you." There was a pause. I'm ashamed to admit that I listened. You know how I am. I thought I could help mediate. I thought I understood the situation. "And now?" I said. "And now I've been watching this for 2 months, and I need you to understand that this is not about Marlene's rent." Another pause, longer this time. "Carolyn, last week Dale asked me whether I thought you'd agree to put the house in his name alone if Marlene moved in as a kind of family investment arrangement. He framed it like it was my idea he was workshopping. He said it would protect Marlene's stability and simplify the finances." My hand tightened on the phone. Outside the car, the evening was turning purple and soft, the neighbors' sprinklers clicking on across the street. Ordinary, everything ordinary. "He wanted you to convince me," I said. "Yes. And you're telling me instead." "I'm telling you instead." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I'm sorry, Carolyn. I should have called you 2 months ago. I don't know what I was thinking." I didn't say anything for a moment. My heart was beating very steadily, which surprised me. I would have expected my heart to race. It didn't. It just beat, slow and even, while the sprinklers clicked and the sky went from purple to gray. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I mean that." "What are you going to do?" Renee asked. "Exactly what I should have done in July," I said. "I'm going to stop waiting for him to choose me." I didn't go inside right away. I sat in that car for another 20 minutes, and I made a list on my phone. Not an emotional list, not a list of grievances, but a practical one. What I needed to do, in what order, by when. I am an accountant. When the world goes sideways, I make a list. Patricia Suarez's office opened at 8:30 the next morning. I called at 8:31. The following 6 weeks were the most controlled chaos I have ever lived through. Patricia filed for divorce on a Wednesday in early October. I had already quietly moved the bulk of my personal savings, money from my individual account, not a cent of joint funds, into an account Marlene had no knowledge of and Dale had no access to. Patricia had been clear, don't touch the joint accounts, don't do anything that looks like dissipation of marital assets. I followed her instructions to the letter. I always follow instructions to the letter. Dale's reaction when the papers were served was not what I expected. I had prepared myself for anger, for a scene, for Marlene approaching at my door within the hour. What happened instead was silence. He came home that evening. We were still living in the same house, which Patricia had told me was normal and was actually in my favor. And he sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the papers for a long time without saying anything. I was making tea. I didn't turn around. Finally, he said, "Is this really what you want?" "Yes," I said. I didn't say it cruelly. I said it the way I'd say the answer to an arithmetic problem. Because it was true, and because we had both known it for a while, and because there was nothing left to argue about. "Because of my mother," he said. I turned around then. I looked at him, really looked at him, the way I hadn't in months, and I said, "No, Dale, because of you. Your mother is exactly who she's always been. You're the one who changed." He didn't argue with that. I think, somewhere underneath everything, he knew it was true. Marlene, however, was not quiet. She showed up the next morning at 7:45, before Dale had left for work, and I could hear her voice from upstairs before I even got to the landing. That particular pitch she hits when she's performing outrage for an audience, even if the audience is only herself. By the time I came downstairs, she was in the kitchen, still in her coat, and she turned to me with an expression that I can only describe as theatrical fury. "I know what you've done," she said. "Good morning, Marlene," I said, and walked to the coffee maker. "You think you can push me out? After everything? Dale, tell her. Tell her she can't do this." Dale was standing by the back door with his work bag. He looked like a man waiting for a bus that was already late. "Mom," he said quietly, "this isn't your conversation." She stared at him. I watched her recalibrate, the way she always did when a tactic wasn't working, and then she turned back to me. "You are making a catastrophic mistake," she said. "Without Dale, you have no family. You have nothing." I poured my coffee. I took a sip. I said, "I have a 14-floor attorney's office downtown and a very thorough paper trail. That's enough for now." She left 20 minutes later. I heard her say something to Dale on the porch, too low for me to catch. I didn't need to. I had stopped needing to track every word she said. What I hadn't anticipated, what nobody told me, and what I should have anticipated because I know how money works, was that Dale would go to Marlene for advice on the financial side of the divorce. Patricia found out through Dale's own attorney, who let something slip during a disclosure conversation, and she called me on a Thursday afternoon to tell me that Dale was apparently under the impression that he could claim partial ownership of my 401k on the grounds that our household had functioned as a single financial unit. "Can he?" I asked. "In Ohio, contributions made during the marriage are generally considered marital property regardless of whose name is on the account," Patricia said. "However, you've been meticulous about your records. We can demonstrate the proportional breakdown, we can demonstrate that the contributions came from your separate income stream, and frankly, his attorney knows the argument is thin. I think this is a pressure tactic." "Marlene's idea," I said. "Probably," Patricia said. "It doesn't matter whose idea it is. What matters is that we're prepared, and we are. We were prepared. That's the thing about spending 22 years paying obsessive attention to financial details. When someone comes after your money, you have receipts, literally. I had 22 years of meticulous contribution records, tax returns, pay stubs, and account statements. I had documentation going back further than most people keep their grocery lists. Dale's attorney took one look at what Patricia produced in the discovery phase, and the 401k argument quietly disappeared. The house negotiation was harder. We were both on the deed, and neither of us had the appetite for a protracted legal battle. Patricia recommended a buyout. I had enough liquid assets, between savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother that had always stayed in my name, to offer Dale a fair market share of the equity without selling. We had the house appraised in November. The number came back at $387,000. We owed $94,000 on the mortgage. That left roughly $293,000 in equity. I offered Dale $140,000 for his half, slightly above the strict mathematical split, because Patricia advised that a clean exit was worth more than a prolonged fight, and after 2 weeks of back and forth through the attorneys, he accepted. I refinanced the mortgage in my name alone in early December. The day the paperwork was finalized, I sat in the notary's office and signed my name 11 times and felt, with each signature, like I was drawing a line. Now, Marlene, the moment I told you about at the very beginning, the delivery driver coming up the path, Marlene leaning out her door to announce to Patty across the yard that her son had put his wife in her place, that I'd be covering her rent and her food. That happened on a Thursday in late November, about 3 weeks after Dale had officially moved out and into a rental apartment across town, which means that Marlene was bragging about a victory that had not only already failed, but that she was apparently still running in her head like a highlight reel. I heard her through my open kitchen window, and I stood at the sink with cold water running over my wrists, and I let her finish. I let her get the whole thing out, the part about being managed, the part about the rent, all of it, because I wanted to hear exactly how she was telling the story. And then the doorbell rang. I thought it was the DoorDash driver. Marlene clearly thought it was the DoorDash driver. We both started toward the front of the house. It was Renee. She was standing on the porch with her winter coat still buttoned and her phone in her hand, and the expression on her face was not the expression of someone who had stopped by to visit. It was the expression of someone who had driven 40 minutes from her house in Westerville with a specific purpose and was not leaving until it was accomplished. Behind her, coming up the front path, was Patty, not the delivery driver. Patty, who had apparently been close enough to hear Marlene's announcement and had followed the sound of the doorbell with the instinct of someone who does not want to miss whatever happens next. And behind Patty, rolling a small wheeled cooler that I recognized as belonging to another neighbor, was Deb. I had not called Deb. I had not called Renee. I had not staged any of this. Later, Deb told me she'd texted Renee that morning to say she was going to stop by and drop off some food because she knew the final mortgage paperwork was that week and she wanted to check on me. Renee had said she was thinking the same thing. They had, entirely independently and without coordinating with me, decided to show up on the same afternoon. Patty had simply been outside when Marlene started performing, so there we all were on the front porch, and there was Marlene, who had come around from next door to intercept the delivery driver, and instead found herself facing the four of us. She recovered quickly, I'll give her that. She smiled. "Well," she said, "it looks like a party." "It does," Renee said. Her voice was perfectly pleasant and absolutely flat. "We were just talking about you, actually. Patty was just telling us what you said about Carolyn covering your rent." Marlene's smile held. "I was just explaining the family arrangement to Patty." "There is no arrangement," I said. I heard my own voice clearly, steady, no wobble in it anywhere. "There is no family arrangement, Marlene, because there is no family arrangement to have. The divorce was finalized last week. The house is mine. Dale's moved out. Whatever you told Patty happened in your imagination." The smile finally slipped. Just a fraction. "Dale would never—" "Dale signed the settlement agreement," I said. "Patricia Suarez filed it with the Franklin County Clerk on November 14th. It's public record. You're welcome to look it up." Marlene turned to look at Patty, which was a mistake, because Patty's expression was the expression of a woman who has just watched a magic trick revealed and is deeply satisfied by the mechanics of it. "I don't understand," Marlene said, and for the first time in the 4 years I had lived 4 streets from this woman, she sounded genuinely uncertain. "I know you don't," I said, "and I'm not going to explain it, but I want you to understand one thing very clearly." I stepped forward, just one step, enough to be precise. "This is my house. My name is the only name on the deed and the mortgage. You are standing on my property, and if I hear that you've said my name to any of my neighbors in any context other than good morning, I will ask Patricia to draft a cease and desist letter, which will cost me about $300 and will cost you a great deal more in embarrassment. Do you understand?" She stared at me. She was 68 years old and accustomed to getting her way, and she was standing on my porch steps in her good coat, with Patty and Deb and Renee watching her, and she had absolutely nothing left to play. "I was only trying to help my son," she said, and her voice had gone small in a way I had never heard from her before. "I know," I said, "but he's not here anymore, and I am." She left. She walked back around to her own yard without another word, and I watched her go, and then I turned around and Deb was already pulling the cooler inside, and Renee was hugging me, actually hugging me, which Renee almost never does. And Patty said, "I always knew she was full of it," and the 4 of us ended up sitting at my kitchen table for 3 hours, with soup from Deb's cooler and a bottle of wine that Renee had in her bag. And it was the best evening I'd had in longer than I could remember. The DoorDash driver showed up 40 minutes later. I tipped him 20%. The divorce was final in the 2nd week of December, 17 days before Christmas. Dale and I divided the last of the shared accounts cleanly, split the contents of the joint savings exactly down the middle, and signed off on everything without a single additional argument. He texted me the day after the finalization, not a call, a text, and said he was sorry. 2 words, "I'm sorry." I sat with my phone and thought about what I wanted to say back, and then I typed, "I know," and put my phone down and made dinner. It's March now, 7 months since that July evening when I stood in the kitchen and heard about the basement conversion brochure for the first time. The house is quiet in a way it hasn't been in years, a good quiet, not an empty one. I repainted the second bedroom over a long weekend in January, a color called sea smoke that Deb picked out and that I initially thought was too gray and now love completely. My home office is still locked, but only because I'm organized, not because I'm afraid of anyone going through it. Marlene moved to a smaller apartment in February, about 12 miles away, after her landlord raised her rent again. I know this not because she told me, but because Patty mentioned it in passing.